A raging winter blizzard all but buries a desperate widow, Rowena Mercer, in her remote Dakota Territory cabin with no one to turn to and a newborn clutched tight against her chest. That's when Dr. Jonah Storm, a half-Comanche physician braving the merciless storm on horseback, arrives at her door in the nick of time. In the days that follow, they forge a fragile alliance against both the lethal cold and Rowena's life-threatening condition, only to find themselves thrust into an even harsher test when the frontier town demands they marry or face scandal. Curious how they survived that ferocious blizzard, eager to learn how a forced proposal could bring their hearts closer or drive them apart. Don't miss this story's twists and turns. Stay tuned as they wrestle with prejudice, shattered dreams, and a newborn's future, and if their resilience touches your heart. Subscribe to our channel. It's your support that keeps these poignant frontier tales coming, each one a testament to hope, courage, and unexpected love in the wildest of places. In the ferocious winter of 1876, Rowena Mercer found herself isolated and in peril on the sweeping plains of the Dakota Territory. A ruthless blizzard had raged for days, burying her modest cabin under mountains of snow. Wind shrieked across the frozen landscape like a relentless banshee. Bitter cold seeped through every gap in the log walls. Rowena's husband Harlan lay in a shallow grave behind the cabin claimed by fever before the storm struck. Now, with only meager firewood and scant provisions, Rowena feared she and her newborn son Henry would soon join him in death. She had tried to keep the fire alive, consuming splintered pieces of chairs and tables, but the meager flames offered little warmth. Her breast formed clouds of vapor in the frigid air, and her lips felt cracked and swollen from dehydration. Yet the thought of letting Henry perish was unthinkable. So she clung to hope, however dim that rescue might arrive. "Just hold on, little one," she whispered, nestling the infant against her chest for what warmth her trembling body could still provide. 2 days earlier, after burying her husband with trembling hands, she had resigned herself to outlasting the storm. But as the blizzard roared without any sign of mercy, her resolve slowly withered. In the gray morning light, Henry coughed weakly, a sound that shattered her heart. Rowena had left Philadelphia months ago with Harlan chasing dreams of independence on these endless plains. Now her mind drifted to a distant memory, a warm music room in her parents' row house, the piano's notes mingling with her younger siblings' laughter. That world felt impossibly far away. Rowena dozed half delirious, half awake. A splintering noise jerked her into alertness. Some gust of wind assaulting the cabin, she assumed, but the sound repeated, accompanied by an urgent voice. "Anyone inside?" The words barely pierced her frost-numbed consciousness. Through bleary vision, she saw the cabin door jolt open. Snow whirled in, and the silhouette of a tall figure loomed, a man wrapped in thick furs dusted with white. "Please," she rasped, hardly believing her senses. "The baby." That was all she managed before the world tilted. She collapsed, Henry still pressed to her breast. She barely registered, strong arms catching her before reality faded. The man who stepped in was Dr. Jonah Storm, a half-Comanche physician who braved the fury of the elements in search of an ailing family reportedly trapped in the storm. Sleet stung his face as he forced the door shut, shutting out the roaring wind. At 36, he had survived many a winter in this rough territory, but even he recognized this blizzard's lethal potential. Pale light from the dying embers showed Rowena curled on the floor with an infant, the tiny one's breath too faint for comfort. Without hesitation, Jonah kicked aside the feeble remains of broken furniture to stoke the fireplace. He rummaged for even the smallest splinters, coaxing the embers into flames. The immediate goal: restore heat before mother and child succumbed to the cold. Rowena gazed at him through half-lidded eyes, registering the outline of his high cheekbones and the copper tone of his skin, hallmarks of mixed ancestry. Moments later, Jonah knelt by her side, quickly assessing Rowena's weak pulse and the baby's shallow breathing. The woman needed medical care, the baby needed warmth, and neither had long to spare. "My name is Jonah Storm," he said, voice calm yet urgent. "I'm a doctor. I'm here to help." Though they were strangers from entirely different worlds, survival demanded they rely on one another, no matter what social strictures might say about a half-Comanche man and a white widow sharing a cabin in the dead of winter. Rowena woke to the scent of a makeshift stew simmering and the crackle of revived flames in the fireplace. For a moment, she imagined it was Harlan tending the fire. Then memory of his burial behind the cabin flared, driving a stab of grief through her. Instead of Harlan's familiar shape, she saw Jonah Storm kneeling before the hearth, adding small chunks of wood to strengthen the blaze. Henry lay nearby, bundled in a thick fur blanket that Rowena didn't recognize. She realized that Jonah must have brought it in with his supplies. She tried to sit up, her body rebelling at every movement. Jonah hurried to her side, gently supporting her shoulders and easing her back against the cabin's single remaining chair. Careful, he cautioned. You're weak from cold and childbirth. Before Rowena could protest, he pressed a cup of hot liquid into her hands. Drink, he urged. It's a mild broth with herbs for energy. At first sip, the warmth coursed through her, banishing the claws of frost that had latched onto her bones. Henry stirred, letting out a faint cry. Rowena cradled him against her chest, relieved to see he was breathing more steadily. You're a doctor, she managed, meeting Jonah's gaze. How did you find us? Word reached a trading post in Cottonwood Bend, he replied. A trapper mentioned a young couple settled here. With the blizzard raging, folks worried you might be in trouble. His tone was matter-of-fact, but Rowena sensed the magnitude of his undertaking. Venturing out in such a storm for strangers required extraordinary resolve. As Henry latched onto Nurse Jonah busied himself rearranging the makeshift bedding he'd fashioned. My mother was Comanche, he remarked softly, possibly guessing her unspoken questions about his heritage. My father, an army surgeon, I learned frontier survival from one side, medical science from the other. His words explained his quiet confidence. The easy blending of native craft and Western medicine, evident in the bundle of herbs, the buffalo hide coat, the well-honed axe leaning against the wall. Without waiting for further query, Jonah examined Rowena with professional thoroughness, her pulse, her temperature, and her belly still tender from childbirth. His brow furrowed at the signs of infection lurking in her postpartum wounds. We'll need to treat that carefully, he said, rummaging in his leather pouch for a small satchel of dried leaves. My mother's remedy combined with standard Western disinfectants. Rowena, too exhausted to resist, let him brew an herbal infusion over the fire. Between sips of the infusion, Rowena conveyed the starkness of her predicament. Harlan's fever overtook him mere hours after Henry's birth, leaving Rowena too weak to seek help. The storm had then trapped her, forcing her to bury her husband in a shallow snow-packed grave. I did what I could, she confessed, voice trembling. But this land is harsher than I ever imagined. Without you, I'd have followed him into the grave. We still have work ahead, Jonah cautioned. This storm might last days. Our resources are limited. Indeed, the small stack of firewood he'd gathered wouldn't last indefinitely, and the cabin's provisions were nearly depleted. If conditions didn't improve, they'd need to search for more fuel and possibly game to replenish food. They fell into an uneasy rhythm that first day. Jonah fed the fire-administered medicine and prepared simple nourishment. Rowena rested and nursed Henry, too weak to do much else. She couldn't help observing Jonah's methodical competence, from how he layered wood in the hearth for maximal heat to how he handled Henry with large yet gentle hands. At one point, he ventured out to bring more snow for melting, returning half buried in drifts, but triumphant. We'll have water, he said simply, shaking ice crystals from his hood. When night fell, the wind battered the cabin walls so fiercely that Rowena feared they'd collapse. She whispered lullabies to Henry, half for his comfort, half to steady her own nerves. Jonah, sitting by the fire, remained alert, stoking the flames with bits of furniture he had broken up earlier. Their eyes met across the flickering light, shared understanding passing between them. They came from different worlds, but in this brutal winter, survival demanded unity. Neither spoke the thought aloud, but both recognized that here societal boundaries meant nothing compared to the raw challenge of staying alive. Morning arrived gray and merciless. A howling wind continued to dump snow that clung to the windows, reducing visibility to near zero. Jonah Storm stepped outside briefly to assess the accumulating drifts, returning with news that made Rowena's stomach tighten. The door would soon be barricaded by snow if they didn't dig out soon. Yet the storm's fury was so intense, going too far from the cabin risked being lost in a whiteout. Survival remained a precarious tightrope act. Throughout the second day, Jonah tended both mother and child with unwavering focus. He used every tool in his medical kit, Western bandages and antiseptics, native salves and teas to combat the infection, smoldering in Rowena's body. She felt the fever recede, gradually replaced by cautious hope. Henry, too, began to nurse more vigorously, his frail cries transforming into stronger whimpers. When Rowena urged Jonah to rest, he shook his head. I can sleep later. Medicine can't wait. Indeed, she noticed how he carefully measured each dose, muttering half to himself about blending the Comanche healing tradition of life bloom root with standard laudanum. Neither alone is enough, he confided, but together they might break the infection before it spreads. In the calm moments between treatments, they exchanged fragments of their personal histories. Rowena, once a teacher in Philadelphia, had left behind a comfortable but stifling life, to marry Harlan. Jonah, having studied medicine in Chicago, returned to the frontier to serve settlements that distrusted him for his half-Comanche identity, but grudgingly needed his expertise. "It's lonely," he admitted, lips tightening in a faint grimace, "but it's the only way I know to honor both my parents' legacies." "What about your mother's people?" Rowena asked. "Would they accept you more than the settlers do?" Jonah's gaze flickered. "Some do," he said softly. "Others see me as too close to the settlers. My father once told me living in the space between two worlds is both a privilege and a curse." Rowena recalled how her own parents, devoutly academic, had disapproved of her marriage to Harlan, a dreamer unbound by conventional ambitions. She wondered if Jonah's existence mirrored her own boundary, crossing magnified 1,000 times by deep racial divides. Time slipped by in intervals marked by Henry's feedings and the incremental tasks of stoking the fire. Jonah fashioned a small pot over the flames to melt snow for drinking water. In quieter spells, he whittled broken chair legs into neat stacks of kindling. Now and then, Rowena would awaken from brief dozes to find him humming softly, a low, melodic tune that reminded her of distant plains under the wide sky. She suspected it was a Comanche healing song, though he never explained. On the second night, as Rowena dozed, an abrupt clatter jolted her awake. Jonah had dropped a tin cup, face contorted in sudden alarm. "Your fever's spiking again," he muttered swiftly, placing his palm against her forehead. Indeed, she felt clammy and dizzy, a resurgence of infection surging through her veins. Struggling, she tried to keep her focus. Jonah quickly concocted another herbal mixture, urging her to drink. Through the haze, she felt the press of a cold rag against her forehead, Jonah's calm voice anchoring her. "Stay with me," he repeated, gaze intense. At the edge of consciousness, Rowena perceived how vital Jonah's presence truly was, not simply because he had the medical knowledge, but because his unyielding commitment gave her reason to fight for survival. "I won't give up," she whispered, voice slurred by fever. "Henry needs me." And she didn't finish the thought, but Jonah nodded as if understanding anyway. The ferocious wind outside underscored their fragility, but within the cramped space of a storm-besieged cabin, the two of them forged a tentative alliance, one that might have broken under normal societal rules, but here necessity made it indispensable. By the third day, the storm began to subside. Snow still fell, but in smaller flurries rather than the whiteout fury of before. Jonah peered out through a gap in the window's frosted glass, gauging the drifts. "We can't stay here forever," he said, turning to Rowena. "Supplies won't last. We must reach the nearest settlement." They both knew the essential next step was to replenish their resources. Jonah estimated a trading post lay roughly 15 miles away, but traversing that distance with Rowena still weakened and Henry so young would be perilous, complicating matters. Rowena's infection had retreated significantly but required ongoing care. Another setback could prove fatal. "We need more firewood and probably game," Jonah reasoned. "This meager stock won't see us through another blizzard if one returns." Carefully bundling Henry against her chest, Rowena insisted on assisting, despite Jonah's protestations that she was too frail. "I can handle small tasks," she said firmly. "If the wind's calmer, let me at least help gather fallen branches near the cabin." Recognizing her determination, Jonah reluctantly agreed on the condition she rest frequently. Their plan: Jonah would fell a nearby sapling or two for firewood, while Rowena collected dry branches in the lee of the cabin, stepping outside under overcast skies. Rowena sucked in a shaky breath. Although the storm had eased, waist-high drifts still encircled the cabin. Jonah used a shovel rescued from a half-buried shed behind the cabin to carve a path through the snow. Rowena emerged gingerly, dazzled by the silent expanse of white. Henry's tiny face remained tucked within warm layers, only his dark eyes peeking out. Jonah soon found a suitable pine, vigorously swinging his axe at its trunk. The crisp echo of steel meeting wood was oddly comforting, a reminder of purposeful labor. Rowena, lacking the strength to chop, contented herself with snatching windfall branches. Though lightheaded at times, she found relief in contributing. "I hate feeling useless," she murmured, leaning against a half-buried stump to catch her breath. "You're anything but useless," Jonah said, pausing his axe to send her a reassuring glance. "Caring for your son while recovering is a feat in itself." She offered a faint smile, gratitude and something more stirring in her chest. In truth, his unwavering support buoyed her spirits. Several times he recommended she return inside, but she persisted until he had enough saplings and branches for a sizable stack. By noon, they'd accumulated a decent haul. Rowena, shivering, finally relented to Jonah's advice. Inside, she tended to Henry, who nursed quietly. Jonah's face flushed from exertion, took a moment to breathe. "We've enough firewood for a week if we're careful," he said. By then the path to that trading post might be clearer. He started to say something else, but hesitated, a flicker of conflict in his eyes. That evening, as the wind calmed further, they savored a small meal of boiled pine needle tea and the last ration of salted meat from Jonah's saddlebag. "Tomorrow," Jonah declared, "I'll scout a bit farther, see if I can hunt something. We can't rely on my leftover supplies much longer." Rowena understood the danger. If he didn't find game, and the trading post remained out of reach, they risked starvation. But she also knew his skill. If anyone could succeed, it was Jonah Storm. Before turning in for the night, Jonah checked Rowena's temperature again. "You're stable," he said, relief evident in his tone. "But be cautious if you help me tomorrow." "Exertion could cause a relapse," Rowena nodded. Aware of her body's limits, "I'll do what I must, but trust your guidance." In the dim glow of firelight, Henry lay asleep in his cradle. Rowena slid onto her makeshift bedding, catching Jonah's eye across the small cabin. She sensed his concern extended beyond mere professional duty. Likewise, she found herself caring more about his well-being than was strictly logical for a frontier doctor. But in a land where tomorrow's survival wasn't guaranteed, unspoken feelings might be all they had for now. With that final thought, she drifted into fragile sleep, warmed by a sense that, if nothing else, they faced the cold as allies rather than strangers. By dawn of the fourth day, Jonah left the cabin with his rifle slung across his back, determined to bring back fresh meat. Rowena protested being left alone, but he assured her that with a renewed stock of firewood and the storm tapering off, she and Henry would be safe for a few hours. "Keep the fire strong." "I'll return by midday," he said, slipping out quietly. Rowena set about small tasks, tidying the cramped space, boiling snow for water, and humming lullabies to Henry. She dared hope the worst of the blizzard had passed. Her infection felt more manageable, and Henry's color improved daily. Yet every rattling gust outside rekindled memories of how close they'd come to death. To calm herself, she replayed Jonah's words in her mind, recalling how his voice softened whenever he mentioned healing. Mid-morning, she heard movement outside. Her heart leapt Jonah, but the door swung open to reveal a stranger. A wiry man wearing layers of grimy pelts, a roving trapper by the look of him. His eyes flicked around, taking in Rowena and the child, then the small pile of Jonah's supplies. "Where's the doc?" he demanded, stepping inside without invitation, letting cold air flood the room. Rowena's pulse hammered. She tried to sound poised. "He's out hunting. He'll be back soon." Something about the man's manner, his hungry stare, the way his hand hovered near a worn pistol, set her on edge. Could he be scouting for loot? Frontier life abounded with desperados who'd take advantage of anyone vulnerable. The trapper's gaze rested on the baby, then on Rowena's half-healed state. "Reckon I'll wait," he said gruffly. "Cold out there?" He advanced toward the fire hands outstretched, apparently to warm himself. Rowena forced a polite nod, though her nerves jangled. Should she show hostility or play along until Jonah returned? The man didn't bother giving his name, nor did he remove the thick hide covering his unkempt hair. Minutes crawled. The trapper eyed Jonah's rifle stand where Jonah had left a spare shotgun, his expression one of calculating greed. "He's got nice gear," the man commented, voice carrying an undercurrent of envy. Rowena kept her tone even. "He's a respected doctor. Many folks appreciate his help." The trapper let out a scoffing grunt. "Half-breed doc, right? Heard about him and Cottonwood Ben. Some call him the savage Sawbones." Irritation flared. Rowena found herself defending Jonah. "He saved my life and my son's. That's all that matters to me." The trapper smirked, revealing yellowed teeth. "Heard lots of scandalous talk. He crosses boundaries, not quite white, not quite Indian, makes trouble." She recognized the seed of racism that often flourished in lonely corners of the territory. She also realized how precarious her situation was if he turned violent. As tension built, the door crashed open again. Jonah stood there, rifle in hand, fresh snow dusting his coat. A relief washed over Rowena. The trapper spun around, stiffening. Jonah's dark gaze swept the scene, taking immediate stock of the intruder. "Who are you?" he demanded, voice low and composed, but carrying an unmistakable warning. The man swallowed, shifting from foot to foot. "Name's Harp. I was passing by. Saw smoke. Thought I'd wait for you, Doc. Maybe trade goods." Jonah didn't budge. "I'm not interested in any trade. You'd best move on." Harp's eyes flicked between Jonah's calm yet formidable stance and the loaded rifle resting in Jonah's hand. He realized he was outmatched, the trapper muttered, stomping out. Fools can freeze for all I care. With that, he marched away, slamming the door. Jonah exhaled slowly, then turned to Rowena. You all right? She nodded, though adrenaline still coursed through her. The danger had been brief but sobering. Even as the blizzard subsided, other threats lurked. Henry let out a small cry as if sensing the tension. Jonah crossed to the fire, placing 2 rabbits he'd managed to snare. At least we'll have a decent meal tonight, he said, trying to shift focus. Rowena sank into the chair, holding Henry tight. She could hardly believe how protective she felt for Henry, and in a strange way for Jonah as well. He gave her a faint, almost apologetic smile. This territory challenges us in different forms, he said softly. We keep each other alive through storms of snow or storms of ignorance. Rowena nodded, hearing the truth behind his words. No matter what new trials lay ahead, they'd face them hand in hand, half-formed partnership though it was. That afternoon, Jonah expertly skinned and prepared the rabbits over a small, makeshift grill. He rigged above the hearth, Rowena bolstered by a fresh surge of energy, assisted by collecting melted snow for water, and checking on Henry, who quietly observed from his cradle, as if entranced by the dancing flames. The cabin, though still cramped, felt more like a shared homefront than a mere shelter. Survival had united them in ways standard frontier etiquette would never have allowed. Over a meal of roast rabbit and wild onions, Jonah had gathered they spoke of more practical matters. How many days until Rowena could safely attempt the trip to the nearest settlement? Whether she trusted her healing enough to ride horseback with Henry secured to her chest? If Jonah's horse, a sturdy Mustang named Blackleaf, could manage 2 riders plus supplies. Perhaps in another 2 or 3 days, Jonah suggested, eyeing Rowena's gait as she crossed the floor. You're stronger, but not yet fully recovered. You mustn't push too hard. They also discussed the unknown reception awaiting them. Although Jonah rarely stayed in one place, he was familiar with the prejudices that might greet Rowena, a widowed newcomer with an infant, and him, a half-Comanche physician who crossed social lines. I've seen towns welcome me only when in dire need, Jonah admitted, and shun me otherwise. But we have no choice if we want safety for Henry. Rowena recalled how Philadelphia society had pried into her decision to marry Harlan, an adventurous soul. Yet that scrutiny seemed quaint compared to the raw power frontier communities held. Here acceptance could mean the difference between life and death. She wondered if the rumors of them sharing a cabin unchaperoned would spark gossip. Then again, gossip was a small price to pay for rescue from a blizzard. If tongues wagged, so be it. Henry's survival outweighed social niceties. At nightfall, with the wind calmer and the sky clearing, Rowena found herself marveling at the scattering of stars visible through a window. Jonah had painstakingly scraped free of ice. Even with minimal lamplight, the night sky glowed in silent majesty. I never realized the stars could be so bright out here, she whispered, Henry dozing in her arms. Jonah, standing nearby, nodded. My mother taught me the names of constellations in Comanche. Each star carried a story. He half smiled, adding, Western astronomers have different labels, but wonder is universal. Rowena realized she had come to see Jonah as not just a savior, but a friend, someone whose gentle humor balanced his grim competence, whose cultural fluidity intrigued her beyond polite curiosity. She also sensed a stirring within herself, a warmth that had little to do with the fireplace's heat. Did she dare consider a deeper connection when logic dictated they might part ways soon or else face the narrow-minded judgments of a frontier town? Late that night, as Jonah banked the fire, Rowena's thoughts wandered to the precarious union they formed. Harlan's memory lingered, a beloved ghost, overshadowing her every decision. Could she love again this soon or ever? Did Jonah even see her in that light, or was he simply acting, as a dutiful doctor would, albeit with extraordinary empathy? She drifted to sleep with Henry. Nestled close, lulled by the lullaby tune she'd hummed since he was born, Jonah, seated by the hearth, listened, the melody stirring echoes of his own half-remembered chants. Outside, the snow-laden pines stood tall under starlight, a stark yet tranquil landscape belying the storm's recent wrath. Within those 4 log walls, hearts both wounded and guarded found a fragile harmony, though neither dared name it. On the 5th day since Jonah's arrival, bright sun glinted off the snow and a gentle breeze replaced the storm's roar. Rowena peered outside at a world transformed, still blanketed in white, but calmer, almost serene. Jonah announced he would scout the area to confirm a safe path to the settlement. If conditions hold, we leave tomorrow, he said. Rowena, while anxious about the journey, agreed Henry, only a fortnight old, deserved the security of a true community. Donning his heavy coat, Jonah left before sunrise. Rowena spent the morning tidying the cabin methodically, packing any salvageable belongings, including Harlan's few precious keepsakes, a pocket watch from his father, letters from her parents. The act felt both cathartic and heartbreaking. Each item evoked memories of a future that would never unfold. Yet a stirring sense of new beginnings coexisted with her sorrow, woven by Jonah's presence. As midday approached and Jonah had not returned, Rowena wrestled with nervous anticipation. Eventually she heard snow crunch under boots. The door swung open, revealing Jonah slightly flushed but triumphant. "I reached a ridgeline about 3 miles east," he reported. "The drifts are high but traversable if we ride carefully. The path to Willow Bend Settlement is passable." Willow Bend Settlement. Rowena repeated, a wave of relief mingling with apprehension. She'd pictured the safety of some trading post or outpost, but settlement meant a small but structured community. People, laws, judgments. Yet Jonah's tone remained encouraging. "They have a modest main street, a few shops, and a church. It's far from Philadelphia, but a decent place to rest and recover." They spent the afternoon checking gear. Jonah showed Rowena how to position Henry in a secured sling against her chest, explaining that this arrangement kept the infant's body heat close. He planned to lead the horse on foot much of the way, ensuring stability. Rowena also agreed to frequent dismounts if needed, so neither mother nor baby became too jostled. At dusk, they shared a final meal in the cabin that had improbably become their lifeline. Jonah stirred a pot of broth with bits of leftover rabbit, while Rowena held Henry, pressing her cheek to his soft head. "Reflecting on how far they'd come in a matter of days," Rowena said. "It feels like a lifetime," Jonah agreed. "I've seen storms claim lives in less than a day. The fact that you and Henry survived is extraordinary." The sincerity in his voice warmed her. More than the fire, it reminded her of the intense bond formed when survival was on the line. Before turning in, they dismantled the wooden crate Jonah had used as a makeshift table, adding its pieces to the fire. Rowena noticed Jonah pause, gaze lingering on the small corner where she'd first lain near death. It was as though he too felt the gravity of leaving this place of trial and salvation. In the quiet that night as Henry slept, Rowena found Jonah standing by the shuttered window, staring at the moonlit drifts. "Are you worried about tomorrow?" she asked softly, stepping close. He exhaled as though hesitating whether to speak plainly. "Yes, partly for your health and Henry's safety, but also how Willow Bend might receive us together." That confession struck her heart. They both knew the rumors that trailed half-Comanche men who dared befriend or more white women. Rowena laid a hand gently on Jonah's forearm, unspoken gratitude for his candor. She didn't have a neat answer, only a shared resolve that come what may, they would face it as they had faced the blizzard, with unwavering cooperation. At daybreak they would depart. Rowena felt both eager for civilization's offerings, medical supplies, stable lodging, and uneasy about its prejudices. She whispered a silent prayer that Willow Bend might see Jonah as she had a healer of immense skill and compassion, rather than a target for disdain. If that hope was naive, so be it. As exhaustion overcame her, she realized that for the first time since Harlan's death, she was not dreading tomorrow, but stepping toward it with cautious faith. They rose before the sun. Jonah readied his horse, Blackleaf snugging the saddle straps and fashioning a padded place in front for Rowena. She slipped Henry into his sling, verifying the blankets that cocooned his tiny body. The swirling wind, though calmer than before, still bit fiercely at her cheeks. Jonah double-checked the cabin, ensuring they left nothing essential behind. As Rowena stepped out into the crisp dawn, she couldn't help but glance back at the cabin, the rough-hewn walls that had housed both tragedy and salvation. "We owe this place a lot," she murmured. Jonah nodded. "A cradle of hardship that forced us to rely on each other." They mounted up. Well, Rowena settled in front with Henry, and Jonah took the reins from the ground, leading Blackleaf on foot. The path east, faintly visible under a pinkish sky, shimmered with crusted ice. Progress was slow but steady. Jonah tested each step, ensuring neither horse nor rider slipped. After about an hour, Rowena's thighs ached and Henry stirred restlessly. They paused beneath a stand of pines to rest. Jonah offered Rowena water from a canteen, and she sipped gratefully. "This is going to be a long day," he observed, scanning the horizon, "but the weather holds, so we should be fine." They continued the monotony of muffled hoofbeats and Jonah's measured footsteps, lulling Rowena into semi-trance. Occasionally Henry fussed, and Jonah would find a sheltered spot so she could nurse the baby. Despite the cold and the physical strain, she relished these quiet intervals. Jonah would stand watch, face turned outward to guard their solitude. Each time her heart squeezed with unspoken gratitude that this half-Comanche doctor, scorned by some, had chosen to walk alongside her quite literally. Around midday, Jonah spotted smoke rising over a ridge, the sign that Willow Bend lay near. He pointed, voice tinged with quiet relief there. Another hour or two, as they neared the land's features, sharpened a scattering of log structures, a humble church spire, faint echoes of chopping wood. The settlement looked modest but orderly, a pocket of human warmth in a vast wilderness. Almost instantly, figures emerged. Word traveled fast in frontier towns. Several locals approached, cautious but curious. A tall, broad man waved tentatively. "Doc Stormy," he called. "Heard you might be coming. Everything okay?" Jonah nodded politely. "We're well enough, but Mrs. Mercer needs shelter. She lost her husband in the storm." The man grimaced sympathetically, beckoning them onward. "We'll sort you out. There's the meeting hall. Folks will want to know what happened." Soon Rowena dismounted shakily, Henry secure in her arms, as a small crowd gathered, weathered ranchers, apron-clad women, a pair of youngsters gawking. Jonah introduced her as Mrs. Rowena Mercer, recently widowed, and explained they'd been trapped by the blizzard. A murmur of compassion rippled, but Rowena also sensed wary glances cast at Jonah, some a mix of respect and reluctance, others openly questioning. She recalled Jonah's remark that he was useful to many, but accepted by few. A bearded older man, presumably the settlement's unofficial leader, stepped forward. "Name's Hank Albright," he said with a respectful nod. "Reckon you'll stay in the bunkhouse for now, ma'am. We can arrange something more permanent soon." Rowena mustered a polite smile, grateful for the generosity, but uneasy at how swiftly others determined her life's next steps. Jonah stood slightly apart, as if accustomed to letting townsfolk handle their own. Rowena locked eyes with him, silently conveying her thanks. He gave her a small nod. "I'll check on you in a bit, Mrs. Mercer," he said formally. "Have to see if the settlement has immediate medical concerns first." Hank escorted her to the bunkhouse, a cramped lodging for passing ranch hands. Inside, a cot was hastily arranged. Two women fussed over Henry, some remarking how precious he was, while others whispered about her misfortune. Rowena felt both comforted by human proximity and overwhelmed by the gossip swirling. When Jonah arrived, the bunkhouse quieted. Rowena noticed the shift townsfolk recognized his skill, but didn't fully trust him. She realized he'd worked among them before, likely saving many lives, yet remained an outsider. "Would you like me to examine Henry?" Again he asked, voice gentle, ignoring the whispers. Rowena nodded. As he listened to the baby's heart and lungs, she prayed these people might witness the sincerity she'd experienced, hoping acceptance could bloom here, as it had in their isolated cabin. But frontiers were bound by harsh social codes, as immovable as the snowdrifts they'd conquered. Rowena sensed a gathering tension like a slow coil around them. She didn't foresee how swiftly that tension would erupt, or the startling ultimatum that would trap her and Jonah in a new kind of storm. Within 2 more days, Rowena Mercer's presence and Jonah Storm's role in saving her had become the settlement's primary source of chatter. The tragedy of her husband's death stirred sympathy, but tongues wagged about the 6 days mother and child spent alone in a blizzard with a half-Comanche doctor. While no rational person claimed scandal, rigid moral codes thrived on speculation. If they had been discovered in such close proximity, especially overnight, certain townsfolk deemed it improper. Rumors even reached a church deacon in the neighboring settlement, fueling talk that this kind of living arrangement cast Willow Bend in a negative light. So when the settlement's informal council led by Hank Albright and the local preacher, Reverend Kingston, convened, the outcome jolted Rowena like a thunderbolt. They insisted that, to preserve her reputation and quell gossip, she and Jonah should marry immediately. Rowena stood in the makeshift meeting hall, Henry in her arms, facing a row of grim-faced men. Jonah stood to her right, jaw set in a tight line. "Marriage," she repeated, her voice echoing in the hushed space. "You want to force us to marry?" Hank cleared his throat. "Not forced, ma'am. More like an arrangement for the best of everyone. You, your child, Dr. Storm, standing in the community." The preacher nodded gravely, arms folded over his chest. Martha Willems, one of the settlement's midwives, interjected from the small crowd. "Can't we accept that Dr. Storm did only what was necessary to save them? The woman's barely buried her husband." She glared at the council, but Reverend Kingston shot back. "Appearances, carry weight, rumors spread fast. Protecting Sister Mercer's good name also protects our settlement's moral reputation." A swirl of disbelief and anger swelled in Rowena's chest. How could this be the conclusion, after all, Jonah had done, risking his life, crossing cultural barriers, providing life-saving medicine? And how could she, still grieving, Harlan, be expected to wed a man she knew in such unorthodox circumstances? She glanced at Jonah. He wore a mask of composure, but she sensed turmoil beneath it. "Let me speak with Dr. Storm privately," Rowena asked, controlling the tremble in her voice. Hank nodded, sending them to an adjacent room. Once alone, Rowena and Jonah regarded each other, tension thick in the air. "We're cornered," Jonah said, low-voiced. "If we refuse, they'll ostracize you and me to a degree that might threaten my medical work. And with a baby to think of," she felt tears prick her eyes. "It's horribly unfair. You saved our lives, now they demand we feign a marriage to satisfy their conscience." Jonah's shoulders lifted in a resigned sigh. "We can shape the arrangement on our terms. Perhaps a marriage in name for the settlement's sake, while we privately decide how—" He paused, choosing words cautiously. "How far we take it, so you and Henry have protection, and I can keep practicing medicine without them stoning us." Rowena's heart twisted with conflicting emotions. Relief that Jonah proposed a pragmatic route, sorrow that it reduced their bond to a bureaucratic fix, and gratitude that he cared enough to stand by her. "What if?" she whispered, but couldn't finish. What if under other circumstances they might have chosen each other freely? There was no time for deeper reflection. The council expected an answer. Rowena took a breath, nodded at Jonah. Together, they returned to the meeting hall, confronting the curious stares. "We accept," Rowena announced, holding her chin high despite the humiliation. "We'll marry." A collective sigh of relief swept the room. Rumors would be squashed. Moral order preserved. Reverend Kingston scheduled the ceremony for Sunday, 3 days away. The crowd dispersed, leaving Rowena and Jonah at the hall's threshold, locked in a shared sense of stunned exhaustion. Henry let out a soft murmur in her arms, a reminder of immediate needs. Outwardly, the settlement exhaled its tension, satisfied that decency had been upheld. Inwardly, Rowena and Jonah faced a new reality, a marriage not of love, nor entirely of convenience, but one coerced by frontier mores. Their strange journey from that blizzard-stricken cabin to Willowbend's church aisle would shape their destinies in ways they couldn't predict. For now, they met each other's eyes with unspoken commitment. If they could survive the worst storm nature offered, perhaps they could weather society's storms too. Reflecting on Rowena and Jonah's journey, it's remarkable to see how survival forged a bond that outlasted their harsh circumstances. Confronting a savage blizzard, losing loved ones, and navigating a narrow-minded community might have broken anyone's spirit. Yet side by side, they discovered that compassion, respect, and a shared purpose can transcend cultural lines and gossiping neighbors. Their unconventional marriage, forced by frontier expectations, evolved into a partnership grounded in genuine affection for a newborn child and for each other. From my perspective, their story reveals how adversity can spark unity and growth. Even when choices are imposed rather than freely made, hearts find ways to flourish if given time and mutual understanding. What do you think? Did their makeshift marriage feel fair, or were their hands tied by circumstances? Comment below with your take and join the conversation. And if this stirring frontier tale inspired you, please subscribe to follow many more stories of grit, survival, and the power of unexpected connections.